Good morning, friends. It is good to gather with you today on this hot and steamy Friday morning in the middle of June. I'm Pastor Lorri Landon from First UMC in Kirksville. Well, last week I was down in Branson on Friday morning for the Methodist Church's annual conference, and it was interesting. I had not been to Branson since I was a tiny child, and things have, of course, changed a lot down there. And when we first drove into town, oh my goodness, it was almost overwhelming, even driving along at the slower pace that you do once you hit town, of all the signs, the images, the lights, all of everything that Branson has to offer. We got settled into our hotel, though. We went out and we had dinner. And then after dinner, we went out to take a walk along that same strip. And it was fascinating to see how different it looked at foot pace, right? We weren't going at nearly the speed. Each of the different sights and sounds and images, we could take in one at a time instead of all just like popcorn, one right after the other. And so I had that in my mind as I poked into my chapter this week in our I Guess I Haven't Learned That Yet by Shauna Nyquist. And I came to the next chapter. It's kind of interesting how these chapters fit so well with things that are going on in life. And this one was called The Speed of the Soul. And she was talking in this one about walking and how when they moved to New York, she was in the middle of a sea of grief. And her therapist reminded her that grief is somatic, meaning it lands in our bodies and it needs to be worked out through our arms, our legs, our chests with movement. And for her, that meant walking. Walking far, walking through new neighborhoods, walking sometimes alone, sometimes with a friend. And she wrote, there are more than enough blocks and neighborhoods and parks for all our broken hearts and secret wounds and conversations with ourselves, zigzagging the city. She looks back, and in those early days, sometimes it was those walks, she said, that would sort of ground her back to herself. Forward motion, she wrote, worked out my grief and my anger and my fear, mile by mile, step by step. And it still does. And I loved that image, that bit of that walk it out, step by step, because that's not new to those of us who are Christians, who've spent time in the Bible with the stories of Jesus. We know Jesus walked almost everywhere he went. Some people have chosen to walk on a pilgrimage, maybe the Camino de Santiago in Spain, or a different kind of walk. When we read about, in the Old Testament, folks visiting Jerusalem, they would have had to walk up the hill as they were there. We use it in church circles to talk about our faith, right? We so often talk about our faith as a journey. We might even say, how's your walk, in some contexts, which is another way of saying, how is it with your soul? How are you with God? Someone might describe someone that they know as, that is a person who walks closely with God. And that's a lovely way to think about it, isn't it? That our spiritual lives, our religious experiences, our times of moments of connecting in faith as a long walk with someone we love, someone we want to be near and learn from and know deeply. Because that's what happens when you walk with someone, right? Things unfold little by little. Somewhere in that process of spending time together for sometimes long stretches, things come out that might not otherwise. She writes, I like the fact that it's active, something that happens not just in our heads, but also in our bodies. I believe religious life happens in our hearts and bodies and not just our brains. She reflects a little about our pace of life these days in the 21st century, that sometimes it disconnects us more than it connects us. Um, Things like air travel, we can get to the other side of the country in just a few hours, the other side of the world in a mere day. But should we be able to? I went to look up mileage on Google Maps the other day for this trip to Branson, and I accidentally had the directions set by foot. And so I was taken aback when I saw the time. It said something like well over 100 hours. And I was like, what? And then I realized, oh, that's by foot. That's a very different pace of life. She writes, I know that when I look back on my life, the most depleted, disconnected seasons were the ones where I was simply covering too many miles. My body was moving too quickly for my soul and spirit to catch up. Now, you might have experienced that, maybe not through physical travel from one place to another, but is your body sometimes moving too quickly throughout the course of everything that has to happen in a day or a week for your soul and your spirit to catch up? Is it any wonder that sometimes the answer to how is it with your soul is that our souls are tired? She reflects that when we're walking, there's not that same disconnect of speed, that maybe walking is the speed of the soul, the exact right pacing for our bodies and spirits and hearts and minds to reconnect, to dwell together again. Sometimes the soul has trouble thriving in absolute stillness because what the body holds still needs to be worked out. That grief, that anger, that fear. But too high a rate of speed, especially over time, may violate the soul. And it's that gentle movement that knits it back together. She ends her reflection by saying, we walked out 1,000 frustrations and worries. We walked out our fears and our grief. We covered what seemed like hundreds of miles over those difficult months, and still now we'll swing around a new corner, somewhere we've never walked down before, and turn with a sense of delight. And as we walked, block by block, mile by mile, step by step, I started to feel my body and my soul moving at the same speed, in sync and motion and connection. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to film here today, here in the nursery in this rocker, is that I think sometimes, even if we can't get out to walk, there's something about movement, right? This gentle rocking motion that allows us to do the same kind of thing. Those things that are in our bodies, we work out little bit by bit. Babies that love to be rocked, right? Mine, when they were little, it was hard to sit down and sit still because they wanted that movement. And so maybe, just maybe, if there are ways in which your soul is tired, how could you invite some of that movement in? Now, we're in the middle of a heat spell here in Missouri, so a walk outside may not be as appealing as it is sometimes. Maybe you've got somewhere you could sit and rock. Maybe you've got somewhere, something you can do that invites that movement in through your hands in a different way. Some folks like to knit and find that motion of knitting or crocheting to be similar. And as you do, remember, we're not in it alone. We might not have a physical partner beside us as we walk or as we sit and rock. But one of our other lovely images from annual conference, from one of the trainings, was to picture as you sit, maybe as you sit and rock, but maybe in this empty chair beside you, maybe in that place, Maybe God is there beside you, rocking with you, ready to hear whatever it is that you have to say, ready to receive both your words and your silence. So friends, as you go into these days ahead, know that you do not go alone. May you find ways for whatever your body is holding to find some ways of movement to help move those out in your walk, whatever that looks like right now, whether it's rocky or smooth, or you're sitting by the side of the road exhausted and hot and tired and not sure you can take another step. Take care, friends. Go in the peace of Christ, and I will see you here again next week.